So in this video, assignment number 9, we're going to be talking about the irrational root theorem and the imaginary root theorem. So yesterday we did the rational root theorem, and that talked about what we have to do to get a rational solution, but we also have times where the solutions are either irrational, which is like the square root of 2, square root of 3, or they're imaginary, like 3i or negative 4i. And so let's start with the theorems for the day. The first theorem is the rational root theorem. So whenever we have a rational solution, it could be like the square root of 2, or it could be 4 plus the square root of 5. Those are both irrational because we don't know what the square root of 2 is and we don't know what the square root of 5 is. But you should be familiar now that whenever we solve a quadratic equation, we always have solutions that are like plus and minus the square root of 2. Or if we have 4 plus the square root of 5, it's 4 plus or minus the square root of 5. In other words, those plus and minuses will always exist. And so the irrational root theorem says that if a plus the square root of b is a solution, then so is what its conjugate is, which is a minus the square root of b. So these are called conjugates of each other because the numbers are the same, the a and the b, and the a and the b, a radical b. But the only thing that's different is one time it's plus and one time it's minus. So we should know that a plus and minus the square root of b, if one of them is a solution, then so is the other one. The other theorem of the day is the imaginary root theorem. So those also have conjugates. So we have imaginary numbers like I, or 5i, or even 3 minus 2i. And so we should know that if I is a solution, then so is negative i. If 5i is a solution, then so is negative 5i. If 3 minus 2i is a solution, then so is 3 plus 2i. In other words, if a plus bi is a solution, then so is a minus bi. Those are conjugates of each other, and if one of them is a solution, then the other one must be a solution as well. So let's see how this applies to real problems. Let's start with number 1. We have 3 problems to work on today. Find a cubic polynomial that has the following solutions. Well, 3 is a solution, so is I, but if I is a solution, so is negative I. And so we really have 3 solutions, which means we're going to have 3 factors. One of them is x minus 3. The other one is x minus I, and the other one is x minus negative I, which is x plus I. And so I want to write this cubic polynomial in standard form, and so I'm going to multiply these factors together. I'm going to start with these two here. I'm going to take x times x, which is x squared. X times I is xi. Negative I times x is negative xi. And negative I times positive I is negative I squared. Well, this can be simplified. Positive xi and negative xi, those cancel each other out. I squared is negative 1, so this is like negative 1, which is positive 1. So it's x squared plus 1. And when I multiply the conjugates together, the imaginary parts will always disappear. Same thing with the irrational parts if I'm talking about irrational roots. So then I'm going to multiply this times my first factor, which is x minus 3. So I'm going to have x times x squared is x to the third. I'll have x times 1, which is just x. Then I'm going to have negative 3 times x squared, which is negative 3x squared. And then negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. And so when I put this in standard form, my polynomial equation is going to be x to the third minus 3x squared, if I put this next, plus x minus 3. And that is a polynomial function that if I were to factor it and solve it, my 3 solutions would be 3 and then plus and minus I. Let's take a look at example number 2. You might want to try this one on your own first, see how far you can get, and then start the video back up. So we have negative 1 as a solution, and so is 2 minus I. But if 2 minus I is a solution, then so is 2 plus I. And so now here the factors get a little bit more complicated. The first factor is just going to be x plus 1, because it's x minus negative 1. But then I'm going to have x minus 2 minus I, because this is a solution. My other factor is going to be x minus 2 plus I. That's 2 plus I there. So what I want to do is take these two factors and simplify them. I have the x plus 1 here, but what I'm going to do is put a 1 here and distribute this. So it's going to look like this. X minus 2, and because negative 1 times 2 is negative 2, but negative 1 times negative I is positive I. I'll do the same thing here. I'll put a 1 here, and this is going to be x, but then negative 1 times 2 is negative 2, and negative 1 times positive I is negative I. So I have this trinomial, and I'm going to multiply that times this trinomial. This is going to take some space here, but let's go ahead and get through this. I'm going to take x times each of these three terms. So x times x gives me x squared. X times negative 2 is negative 2x. X times negative I is negative xi. Then I'm going to take the negative 2 and multiply it out. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. Negative 2 times negative I is positive 2i. Then I'm going to multiply the positive I out. I times x, well, that's xi. I times negative 2 is negative 2i. And then positive I times negative I is negative I squared. So we have 9 terms here that we're going to simplify. We have the x squared. Then I have a negative 2x and a negative 2x. Those are my only x terms. So that's negative 4x. Then I have a negative xi and a positive xi. Those cancel each other out. I have a positive 2i and a negative 2i. Those cancel each other out. And then I have a positive 4 and a negative I squared. Well, this is negative 1. Well, that's positive 1. And positive 1 plus 4 is positive 5. So when I multiply these two terms out, I get x squared plus 4, or minus 4x plus 5. And I'm still going to have to multiply that times my first term, which is x plus 1. So let's go through this process. X squared times x is x to the third. X squared times 1 is x squared. Negative 4x times x is negative 4x squared. Negative 4x times 1 is negative 4x. Then if I multiply the 5 out, 5 times x is 5x. 5 times 1 is 5. So then when I simplify this, I will have y equals x to the third. That's this term. Then I have 1x squared minus 4x squared, which is minus 3x squared. Then I have a negative 4x and a positive 5x, which is plus x, and then plus 5. And this is a cubic polynomial that has the solutions of negative 1, 2 minus I, and 2 plus I. All right, let's take a look at our last and final problem for this video. And that is we're going to write a 4th degree polynomial that has roots I and negative 2i. So that means I is a solution, but so is negative I, because they're conjugates of each other. It's like 0 plus I and 0 minus I. If negative 2i is a solution, then so is positive 2i. So I have my 4 solutions. Now I'm going to come up with my 4 factors. One factor is going to be x minus I, the other x plus I. Then I'm going to have another factor over here of x plus 2i, and then another factor of x minus 2i. I'm just going to multiply these 4 factors together. I want to start by multiplying these two together. I'm going to take x times x is x squared. Then I'm going to take x times I, which is xi. Then I'm going to take negative I times x, which is negative xi. And then negative I times positive I, which is negative I squared. But negative I squared is negative 1, so that's positive 1. Xi and negative xi, those cancel each other out. And so what my final answer is going to look like is x squared plus 1. Then I'm going to go over here and multiply these two together. I'm going to take x times x is x squared. X times 2i, or negative 2i is negative 2xi. Then I'm going to take 2i times x. That is positive 2xi. And then 2i times negative 2i is negative 4i squared. But negative 4i squared is negative 4 times negative 1. That's positive 4. Negative 2xi and positive 2xi will cancel each other out. And so I'm going to end up with x squared plus 4. So then I have to multiply these two things together. I'm going to start with x squared times x squared is x to the 4th. Then I'm going to take x squared times 4, which is 4x squared. Then I'll have 1 times x squared is 1x squared. And then 1 times 4 is 4. And my final answer is y equals x to the 4th. 4x squared plus 1x squared is plus 5x squared plus 4. There you have it. That's what our topic is for today, and we will see you tomorrow in class.